Welcome everybody to the season 2 finale recap show. I'm actually your host today because David is preoccupied. Usually he is running the show today, and he asked me to step in and fill in today. So welcome everybody who is showing up and watching us live on all the different streaming platforms today. We've got an exciting show for you, a whole bunch to go over as far as the season finale recap and everything that happened in the show, as well as some new announcements. But really quick, we're going to take care of our official sponsor, the Blind Frog Ranch Outpost. Make sure and go check it out. By popular demand, the Blind Frog Ranch Outpost has issued the BFR scuba sweatshirts. They're 15% off right now if you go to the shop, and make sure and use the coupon code scuba sweat when you go there to blindfrogranchoutpost.com. Make sure and check that out and go get your Blind Frog Ranch merch today and support the show. And hopefully we get to see more from everybody. Joining me today is none other than my co-host today, James Keenan, who is a former police officer, is now a published author and researcher of the unexplained mysteries and ancient history of the Southwest. James has spent a tremendous amount of time in the Uintah Basin and especially researching Blind Frog Ranch. So we're going to go ahead and bring James aboard. James, how you doing today, my friend?
Good, Carl. How are you?
Doing awesome. James, you got to see the season finale last night. What was your just initial thoughts before we bring our other misfits aboard to talk about it?
Yeah, it was interesting, the underground cavern system. Like I've been saying for years, I think everything is below our feet, and whatever is affecting the phenomena that takes place on the basin and in the Uintah Mountains, I think is being generated below our feet underground. So it was really neat to watch the three of them explore what looked to be a very, very large artificial tunnel system, more than likely a mine. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm already wishing they had one extra episode so we could see what their plans were, if they were going to go back down or not.
I hear you, and I've heard a little bit of rumors that we may get a little bit of that if everybody stays patient and stays tuned. And somebody who knows a lot about underground tunnel systems and caves and is going to have some really interesting insight is our first special guest today, who's none other than John Casey. You might know John from the hit TV show Lost Gold of World War II. Ever since he was a little kid, he's been obsessed with the massive lost treasure somewhere in the mountains of the Philippines. Yamashita's lost gold is out there somewhere, and John Casey has been hot on the trail. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Man, I'm so excited to pick your brain about all of this. Did you get to see the season finale last night?
I did. And I can definitely attest to, when poison gases are present, your brain, no treasure's worth dying over. So, getting out of Dodge as quickly as possible and, having moments of a panic attack per se, is real, so I can totally understand, the need to get out of there as quickly as possible. But at the same token, you see that open doorway in down the hall or that tunnel that with the darkness, and you just want to continue on to see what's going on, and knowing that you have to get out, it's just like, it'll have to wait for another day, but dying is not an option. So.
Not one of the options. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the risks when you were watching the season finale as well as the whole show. There's probably a lot of similarities to your experience and work, and we're going to dig into all of that today. And also with a ton of familiarity with the Uintah Basin, local resident and researcher Stephanie Reed has years of experience up there near and around Blind Frog Ranch, involving a variety of unexplained mysteries in the region. And we're really glad to have Stephanie on the show to get her personal experiences and opinions on living and working around Blind Frog Ranch. Stephanie Reed, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much for having me here today. I watched the episode last night, and it reminded me so much of things I did in Wyoming when I worked for the county for weed and pest with the gases. But we could go on to that later, and I'm just excited to be here. And I hope I could share some. Yeah.
Yeah, we just want to go ahead and let everybody get to know you guys. So, John's done a lot of treasure hunting, exploring, and looking for historical locations and artifacts. James, you've done a lot of the same. Stephanie, we just introduced you. Why don't you go ahead and let everybody know a little bit of your background and experience, how long you've been up and around Blind Frog Ranch, and how you got involved in all of
Okay.
this.
I used to live in Wyoming. We moved to Vernal, Utah in 2015. I'm here as a teacher. In Wyoming, I've had experiences with the paranormal all my life, and I came here hoping that I could get away from it and that everything would be okay. And I came here and oh, I'm not getting away from it. It's actually brought me here. So, living here, I've noticed many different things. I've talked to many locals. I am a volunteer at the Heritage Museum, where I get to look at lots of research and data from the past that would really help, I think, Blind Frog Ranch and people to understand that Vernal, Utah is a special place. We have water that runs through underground here, that just water springs and everything that probably have created many caverns in this area in the basin. So, James, have you heard about the running water running through the Uintah Basin as streams?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of my investigation and research is being underground throughout the Uintah Mountains. There's major fault systems that are running east-west through the mountains that have created a lot of mineralization effects. And even north-south at a central point, you have a lot of fissures and caverns, and with the amount of heavy snowfall that occurs, they go into these sinks, and the water running into the sinks then creates these underwater sumps, which are underground lakes. Some of them are a quarter mile, in length, and who knows how deep. And then you get these underground rivers and streams. And I mean, I was on a show that took place on the Uintah Basin, season 2 last year. And one of the points that I tried drilling home was that there was an underground water system running below this property. And sure enough, when they drilled, what did they run into? Enough water to where they had to quit drilling because it just wasn't safe at the drill site hole. So yeah, absolutely. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And, we could spend hours talking about what else is below ground and who's been there, right, and where to find that from.
So maybe, James, you can kind of set the stage, because at the beginning of this season finale, we get that they have accessed finally a dry entrance into the underground, and what is revealed is like a huge, vast tunnel system, it seems like. And this echoes the research and evidence that you've found up there in the basin. So you've spent a lot of time around Blind Frog Ranch, and then we'll see how that compares to John's experience.
Yeah, so yeah, on top of all the natural cavern systems, there over hundreds and hundreds of years has been a lot of mining taking place in the Uintah Mountains in the basin. And, some of what was being mined wasn't supposed to exist, like large amounts of gold ore, which do. There's uranium, iridium, silver, and all of this. So along with those natural cavern systems, we have a lot of underground voids and cavities that were man-made, mine shafts, tunnel systems. And on Duane's property, we knew of about 1.9 miles of an underground system, whether that is completely natural or natural and man-made or other made by an unknown. We weren't quite sure. Now, apparently from, seeing episode 7 and last night's season finale, they drilled 85 feet down, got into what looks to be a mine system where tunnels have been carved out, these large voids. Mm-hmm. And got to remember that if it's been closed up for a long time, there's a lot of gases that have been trapped in there. And that was what we were seeing, was this initial entrance and having to deal with those properties of, certain types of gases being built up, radiation building up. And Dr. Segal, along with radon gas, that's a naturally occurring phenomena that takes place underground. He absolutely hit it, right on point, that when these tests were being conducted in Nevada, these nuclear tests, the government waited for the wind to be blowing into Utah because they didn't want to irradiate Las Vegas or California. They didn't really care much about Utah back in the 40s. So what happened? All this radiation, all this fallout dropped all the way down even into Colorado and Wyoming. And all that ended up leaching into the ground and could have been an additional form of the radiation that they were seeing. So, what we're set up with last night was, having to wait now to see what their plans are for clearing, and cleaning it out, and what they're doing next down below underground.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So your research and everything that you've been looking at is now finally they're coring into that and confirming what you've been scanning, and a lot of your theories have probed around. And John, you've been chasing something clear on the other side of the world that when you watched the season finale, it probably felt really familiar to you. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in searching for these ancient lost locations and their findings. So what have you been up to, John?
At an early age, my cousin Frank, who was world-class hunter, and he was out, mining and metal detecting when I was, in my teens. He showed up one year. I was probably 14 years old. He showed up at our family reunion with, these 4 and 5 ounce gold nuggets in his hand. And, I looked at them and I was just blown away. I'd never seen gold nuggets before, and I never saw gold that size, we're used to gold jewelry and stuff, but not when you see a 4 or 5 ounce nugget, that, looks like a stone, but it's not very huge. But I was hooked at that point in time. And I asked him, I want to go with you. I didn't have a job. I was still in school. He said, I'll take you and you'll have to pay for it yourself. And even back then in the 80s, it was, a couple $1,000, $5,000, $6,000 to go out to these locations or pay-to-day sites, about 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle. So he had taken me up the next summer, and, I knew nothing about anything. But he handed me a metal detector and taught me how to use it. And he said, go off and do what you got to do. And, I searched and searched for days and didn't find nothing. There wasn't much garbage out there, which is incredible. But eventually I did find a 4 ounce nugget, and I was just ecstatic and hooked at that point. And from that point forward, for the next 20 years, Frank and I would go up to that location for 2 weeks out of the year, then 3 weeks out of the year, then a month out of the year. And we kept it as a tradition of us going not only to that place, to places all over Alaska. With these locations, the smallest nuggets we were finding were like 1/2 ounce and 1/4 ounce nuggets. And this is long before, Gold Rush and all those shows show up. And they're mining all this little tiny flakes of gold and stuff. And I'm looking at them like, they're not telling the truth, because I know there's big nuggets out there. But they were just going after a different type of gold. And even today, you don't even see those types of nuggets even being found any longer. So that really got me hooked into, per se, treasure hunting or gold prospecting, and learning about geology and learning about, where this gold came from and how it got there. And then, later I was a construction contractor for most of my life. And when I semi-retired, moved to Florida in 1999, I wanted to do something else. And when I did move to Florida, there was big sinkhole problems down here with people's houses or cracking and driveways falling in. And I didn't want that to happen, because there was a lot of scam artists taking advantage of the system and basically buying a sinkhole property, knowing that it had a sinkhole. Basically, they would go back to the homeowner's insurance and then claim it as a sinkhole property, they would get paid out as a full payout on the insurance policy, which paid off the house. And then they just flip the house and sell it to some unsuspecting person who had no clue about the sinkholes. And they would get screwed because they couldn't get insurance for the house any longer until it was remediated. And I wanted to see that stop. I wanted to see people not buy sinkhole properties. So I developed a company, my company Geoscan, and started scanning for sinkholes with radar and trying to push the legislation to make it mandatory that people get sinkholes scanned and property scanned before they bought it. And eventually that did come to pass. And while I was doing that, the equipment that I was using, the radar systems and the electromagnetic systems were, the data that was coming out of it wasn't really quite conducive to seeing a void space. It could see a void, but in the color bands or the way it depicted it on the screen wasn't really great. It could be confused with other data, the water-filled cavity as opposed to an air-filled cavity. So I started working with the manufacturers to change that, to change how it was depicted in the data. And after about a year of doing that, I knew the data and the equipment better than anybody else. And they started to basically farm me out to their clients who bought equipment. And that's how the treasure hunting aspect of my life started. People would buy this equipment, which is pretty expensive. You're going to spend 50 grand on a radar unit with different antennas and get 2 hours of training at the store and then go off to, some Greece, for example, and set up all that equipment and get the data back, and you're looking at it, you have no clue. You really 2 hours, you can't learn that type of information in 2 hours. So the company would then send me out to the location to supposedly teach them how to use it. But, it cost a pretty penny to send me out to these locations. So by the time I would get there, it was more like they hand me the equipment and say, you scan it, you do it, we're paying you. And they don't really want to learn anything. They just want you to find treasure for them. So that kind of snowballed, and I bought more equipment into the future, all different types of EM and different types of radar, seismic and ERT, and just started getting more of my repertoire of equipment out there. And as it grew, I did more mine work and more oil and gas scanning, and it just kind of snowballed. And it brought me to a lot of different places around the world to see all different types of treasure, whether they were gold or precious metals or they were historical in aspect. And I really started to gain a sense of like, hey, we're missing out here because there's so much information and history buried in the underground that people aren't seeing. And because I worked for these groups, there's a benefactor or financier that would finance the project, and if anything's found, he gets the bulk of everything that comes out of the ground, and the world never gets to see any of it. And this happened over and over and over again every time we'd go to these cool sites. And finally, we're started figuring out that we need to stop that way of doing things. The world needs to be able to understand and see these treasures too. So we need to be able to figure out a way to bring it to the world's attention and to let everybody get involved and share in these discoveries, for the sake of humanity and the sake of our history not being stolen any longer. So that's kind of how
that's how, when you look at the season 2 finale that we just all watched, that's exactly how it all started, was with with their camp getting ransacked and a lot of their stuff getting stolen, and then having to deal with a lot of those outside pressures, whether they be governmental pressures, local authorities, or tribal councils and things like that. But then you also have just trespassers and stuff getting involved. But really quick, I want to touch on your experience with Yamashita's treasure, John. Like, how did you get over there, and how do you find that similar with what you see going on up in the Uintah Basin as well?
It's it's very similar. I mean, for the radiation that might be in effect in Blind Frog, it could have come from many locations, or it could have come from mineralization in the ground. And because you have these cavities now open, you have the radiation perpetuating into the space, and it can't go anywhere. So until the place is actually opened up, you can kind of relieve some of the gases in the air, but whatever is inherent in the rock, if it's radiation, you're not going to get rid of. You do have to be super cautious about how you work around it. And those guys putting protective gear on, protective suits, air hoses, and that is certainly the right way to go about it. once your gas detector goes off, I mean, that thing is so sensitive that's probably 0.05 of a percentage, or maybe 0.005 a percentage of change in oxygen level, and that thing will start screaming at you. And that's good, because that early warning is like your only warning. You got to get out of Dodge now, because if you linger around too long, it may be 1 second, one breath away from not coming back. And again, dying over any treasure is just not worth it. Your life is way more important than any treasure could be. But at the same token, looking off into the distance and seeing the open tunnel beckoning to you in the darkness, it's just knowing that you have to leave, and other things have to get done. It's it's nail biting. I'm like, no, I want to continue going forward. Just take one more peek around the corner so we can see. But understandably, we've come across the same type of thing in the Philippines. The Japanese were really ruthless, and they didn't want you to get to their treasure, so they set up booby traps all over. Bombs and cyanide and different types of poisons, sand traps, water traps. I mean, they went through a lot of different lengths to make sure that their treasure didn't get stolen. And you've got to be really careful. If you don't know what you're doing, it's a lot easy. It's very easy to trip over a glass vial or step on it, and it's in the soils. Once you step on it, you're not even going to have the chance to say you smell something funny, because you wouldn't even get through the sentence. You'd be dead. So it's a real threat, and it should be taken seriously across the board. And just like they did, they took it seriously, and they're here to tell the story. So,
all right.
Yeah,
it's interesting. In your guys' experience, do you think that the cave systems, not only over there in the Philippines, but up at the Uintah Basin, do you think that they're more current mine systems, like were they dug by Yamashita, were they dug by miners just for ore, or are they more ancient mines, you guys think, that have been repurposed for more modern uses, or have been revisited by multiple layers of culture? And James and John and Stephanie, you probably all have thoughts on that.
Yeah,
I have.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, yesterday I got a thing from the Chronicle of Ashley Valley events, and one of the dates, and we probably have already talked about this before, but 1510 was a possible expedition to the basin by members of the Coronado expedition. So, that's over 500 years ago. All right. And so there's that. And then you got 1669, the Spanish inscription carved on Dry Fork Ledge, Alvarez de Leon and Leon Dominion from 1669, the name. So the Spanish were here a long time ago. And they could have been building those caverns like they've talked about. So, John, you're
the Spanish were very, they were very smart. There's a book called De Re Metallica, and it was written in Spanish in the 1500s, and Herbert Hoover actually translated it to English.
Yeah, James has it.
Yeah. So, and I read the book too. It's a really thick book, and it's about really small words and about 3 inches thick, that book. But I think it was one of the most fantastic, interesting learning experiences that I got about the Spanish, and how they were able to literally read the ground, read the geology, read the plants, for God's sake. They could tell the plants that grew in an area where metals or precious metals were in the ground. The plant would actually be stunted or have a different growth pattern than all the other plants around it, where it was positioned over a vein or a metal or metallic fault lines or anything that had to do with mineralization. They were able to read the ground and know exactly where to go. And they were using the Spanish needle or dowsing rod essentially to get themselves into these right locations and read the landscape and know how to go about mining it. In the Uintah Basin, like you said, there's just these aquifers that have been running for thousands of years, hollowing out different locations, grabbing mineralization as it goes and dropping it into the bottom of these tunnel systems. The Spanish probably knew that as they looked at the ground and studied it. They probably knew which time of the year to go, so that whatever tunnels did have like spring runoff and were filled with water, eventually would dissipate enough that they could go in and mine it. And they would get into the natural systems, and then as they're going through the natural system, see the mineralization in the wall or along a fault line, and they would just turn and start tunneling and mining those locations. It's pretty incredible. They were pretty ingenious on the way they went about doing it. And even to this day, I mean, all of the things that are taught in that book can be applied to real life situations. So I think that's part of it, what was going on there, that the Spanish were in there, and then old time miners were in there, and these tunnels were built, and then over the course of time, the flood waters and snow melts and stuff fill up the aquifers, or there's a earthquake and it splits a fault, and now it fills up with water, and what was once dry is not dry any longer. And it's a big problem. People even ask me, like, well, why don't those guys, just drain the pond? It's not that simple. It may be simple to drain the pond, but the regulations and the permits and the BLM and the damage you could do by draining that water out, especially if it's contaminated with radiation or something else that will just kill the plants and kill the animals, and then get into our water supply, and we drink it and we become sick. There's just a lot of ramifications to just sticking a pump in and pumping it out of the ground. So I totally understand why they don't do that. America might not understand it, but again, you got to do things by the book. Otherwise, you're just labeled as a treasure hunter that doesn't care about anything, and you're only after the gold. And that's not what we're about, and it's not what you guys are about either. So, I do see the method to their madness, and everything has to be done according to a very strict set of plans. Plan it first. It's like when we're scuba diving. You make a plan, you dive your plan. Anything that deviates from that plan, the dive is over, and it's for the safety sake of everybody involved. And this is no different. Whether you're working on a treasure site, there's protocols and things that have to get done in steps in order to keep the place safe and stay within regulation and do the job correctly.
Yeah, not only do you have the regulations to follow, but there's all those unknown variables. Like even at Blind Frog Ranch, they get down into the flooded cave system where that wooden box is, and you don't know what's inside the wooden box. You don't know if it's irradiated materials or something buried under there, and you're just going to pump it downstream into the local community's aquifers and make everybody sick. There's consequences to that, but
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really complicated thing. What are your thoughts, James, on who could have maybe made the original tunnel system, or whether it was repurposed? Because you get this talk come up that maybe it could have gone clear back to the Aztec or even older. You mentioned even a lost empire that could be much older. There's evidence that goes around the region clear back to 15 to 18,000 years ago. So who really knows? Look, what are your thoughts on that, James?
Sure. And it's interesting, John, that you brought up the De Re Metallica, because using that book and that information and knowledge is the exact way I'm able to know if this was a mine created by Europeans or if it was a reopened mine. And if it was reopened and repurposed, those are what I'm most interested in, because when you talk to the Native Americans, especially the Utah Territory Indians, the Shoshone, the Timpanogos, to be exact, or even the Paiute. There were obviously Ute as well, not as much as there currently are, but you talk to them and their oral traditions discuss other entities or other species that we think is mythology. But when you look at the historical data, be it oral tradition or petroglyph pictographs, they talk about these giants that were in the desert Southwest. And the Starnake were specifically miners. They were known as mining giants that had tools that made sound, meaning they were pneumatic, electric, or frequency other. Exactly, creating this frequency. And what was it being done? But so you see a lot of reopened, repurposed mines by the Spaniards, and you're like, well, who the heck was originally there? Because the Native Americans never believed in removing anything from the ground. If it was on top of the ground, they might make a trinket or two out of it, and the neck could have been traded throughout the world. But So it's trying to find, going back and seeing exactly who the originating people were that were creating some of the larger mines that seem to have large amounts of ore or cached treasure, as if you want to put it that way. And then in regards to the Aztec, when the conquistadors got to Tenochtitlan and they saw this massive amount of treasure, which other anthropologists and archaeologists aren't willing to say that they had in Mexico, because the gold that comes out of the state of Oaxaca couldn't supply this. Well, what did they do? Well, they're going to torture these Culoa Mexica, which we now know as the Azteca. And what are they going to tell them when they're being, tortured? Well, where the gold is coming from. So when they discussed 7 cities of Cibola, maybe they weren't talking about actual cities that were built in gold. Maybe they were talking about enough cached material that they could have easily created 7 cities of gold, or Aztlan, where the name Aztec comes from. Think about all the other things that Atlantis, Aztlan, you have all these commonalities, and are they really, just one-offs, or is everything connected? It's obviously connected. And, John was saying we've lost so much of the history. Well, where is the history? It's below our feet. It's there. It's not going anywhere. It just has to be found and brought out to the public, because usually when it's found, what happens? Well, you have these people show up and it's suddenly gone, and you're left with just your word. So, and that's what we have to overcome. And it's a process, unfortunately, that's set up by the government that you have to follow and play by the rules, and they don't always play by the rules.
Right. Right. It's more so really got to, try to get them to play by the rules, and the power, in the past. So for every treasure hunt that you go on, or, working with groups, there's a limited amount of people. Maybe there's 50 people in your group. Maybe there's 10, maybe there's 20, with 20 people fighting against the government, you're losing. So no matter how well your contracts are put together, or, even if the government says, yes, you're allowed to do this and whatever. And if there's only 20 people, then they could just come and take it and say, well, screw you, you're shit out of luck. And excuse me. That's it. Right now, trying to use the power of the blockchain is going to be, I think, the way to protect these treasures as we move forward and hold these governments' feet to the fire for the contracts that they give us. If they say that we want 20% of this target, when you recover it, then I'm going to use the power of the blockchain to garner as many people as I can get eyes on this thing. And I want, thousands of people to push back. This way, if the government comes in and says, well, we're taking it, it's not just the 10 people or the 50 people of the project to push back. It's the eyes of the world to see that you are going against your own contract, and they're not going to have it. I'm hoping that the power and numbers factor is the key to us being able to bring these treasures forward and share them with the world, in all aspects of history and or monetization.
So maybe talk a little bit about that, John, because you've got experience with this, with running into finding things and coming across actual evidence, or finding treasure, for lack of a better word. But then you have all these different factors, from not only trespassers trying to get a hold of it, scoundrels try to get their hands on it, but then you have, government agencies and stuff come in and they'll just seize all of it, regardless of whether you have the permits or not, and the antiquities people. So you guys have come up with a plan moving forward of how you're going to protect and do that through your Treasure Quest project. So maybe address the problem and how you guys are facing the solution going forward. And maybe that will help the people at Blind Frog Ranch if they come across a big finding down underground.
I think for every treasure that's out there, and for all the treasure hunters, we are Earth's greatest explorers. I mean, everything, like you said, it didn't go anywhere. Everything in this marble that ever was for hundreds of thousands of years is still buried under our feet. Anything that comes out of the ground that's controversial or goes against the grain of teachings or history or the Bible or any of that stuff, the first thing that happens is those people come and snatch it away. And we don't want you to know about that. We don't want you to change history. We don't want you to think that there was giants here mining gold, or there was other beings that came down and coexisting with us even 100,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, yesterday for that matter. These do exist, and people because they don't have the information, because it's stolen from us so many times, no one gets to learn or see or evaluate that to see how it fits into their own life and how they move forward within themselves and as human beings. We were supposed to go back for our season 3 into back to the Philippines with the show, and then coronavirus hit and shut the world down, and shut the production out of going back into the Philippines to continue the job. And 2-3 years, here we are almost in this end of the second year now with this corona thing, and production still really can't get back into the Philippines. So it's hard to get 40 people in when you can't group up with no more than 4 people, or the Philippine government's going to ban you from the country forever. You'll never be able to come back. So with that, production kind of closed down. But I've been working in the Philippines for the past 15 years prior to the show. I had lots of clients there and lots of jobs going on. And the same thing would happen every time we'd find a little treasure or something. The government would come in and steal it all, regardless of the contract, regardless of the investor, regardless of anything, because there wasn't enough of us to fight back. And then working over there is kind of like the wild, wild west. I mean, you could end up dead like really quick and no one would ever find your body ever. So you got to pick and choose your battles. And as I see this unfolding, we decided that we would create a group or a team, a community to help do this. And that's where we created Treasure Quest Club NFT. And if you guys are not familiar with an NFT project, but an NFT, a non-fungible token, is essentially a piece of artwork that represents your project. So we hired Michael Knapp, who's a world-class artist from Disney, formerly from Blue Sky Studios. His work is just phenomenal. And we had him create this piece of artwork that was a true representation of Yamashita's treasure. Now that artwork is basically sold to the community in fractions. So you create a tokenization, and that basically is a community-driven fundraise, so that picture represents the project and it's world-class art that's, admirable and worth money, hanging on your wall. You can see it in galleries. And as we move forward into the space, so the more people that buy a token, that is a fractionalization of that NFT, that gives us the money to, be able to go out and do these dig sites and keep everything transparent from the very start. All the government contracts, all our contracts, everybody's percentage, what goes where, is all spelled out for the world to see. You can type it in, go to the blockchain and see everything right there in your face. That should help be a mechanism to help keep these governments to stick by the contracts that they give us. They're going to take 20% or 30%, and they're going to allow us to take the rest of the physical treasure out of the country and vault it and then monetize it back to our token holders and back to the to the world, to humanitarian efforts. Even the token holders get, like a return on their investment per se. The token represents this artwork, and the true value of what they bought is in the artwork. But, if we do recover a treasure, then you'll get, one-to-one return on your investment. And there's specialty tokens that will give you sometimes a bonus of, 10-to-1 return on your investment. So at least the community can follow along. We'll do live feeds from the field, so they'll be able to see and talk to us every day to understand what's actually going on in the field. And, as we move and gain these treasures out of the ground and share these things with the world, I hope to create this movement across the world to see these things be shared for everybody's sake and not just stolen by some greedy government or a greedy investor. So that's kind of where the whole project's running, and we're full force into that. Making collaborations with other groups to make sure that the profits from these things go to cleaning up the ocean and go to carbon sequestration and go to helping the people on the ground. Everybody says, "Oh, we'll help the people," but those people are suffering dearly over there. It's the Philippines is probably the richest place on the planet between Yamashita treasure and natural mineralization to be mined and sought. But because of their greed and because of the rules over there, that just doesn't happen. Most of these people still live in literally like bamboo huts. They can throw up a bamboo house in 2 days, and then the whole family groups lives in a 15 by 15 space. And every time a typhoon comes through, then there's no house left. This has to stop. When we have so much wealth and the value of these treasures is so enormous that you do a recovery, and instead of handing out cash, I'm not going to stand on the corner handing people cash. But, I can go to the block company and say, okay, I need 750,000 concrete blocks, and I need, 800 tons of concrete and 400 tons of rebar and all types of building materials. So I can get these people out of their bamboo house and I can put them in a concrete house, and they can build it themselves. They have the needs, and they'll give them all the materials. And the next typhoon will come through, and then at least they'll have a house that stands up to the weather, as opposed to just being blown down, just kind of like the Three Little Piggy story. So we need to make changes. And the only way you make changes is to do it. Because if we rely on other people to do it, nothing's going to get done. So that's kind of where we are in the space. And I see the same for Blind Frog. I mean, we brought on a new partner. We'll be papering up pretty much tomorrow with the conservatory, and they basically take any artifacts that come out of the ground and put that to an NFT into the blockchain, so that it is now protected with the blockchain across the board for eternity. So even if it gets stolen, it can always be tracked and traced through the blockchain when it shows its face to the light of day again. So it's protected, the treasures get protected, the artifacts, antiquities get protected. Everybody wins. It's a win-win situation. So keeps the greed factor down, keeps everybody honest and open up front. What more could you ask for? It's just long overdue what's going on.
That's great, because that moment comes where when you do actually make a historical discovery and you find artifacts or coins or whatever, there's the initial upfront monetary value of the objects, but what gives it that tremendous value is the story wrapped around it and the history behind it, the antiquity, and sometimes how much it reshapes or maybe rewrites history and the value behind that. And not every group or organization wants that information to come out, So you guys are using minting on the blockchain in order to preserve the artifacts and to create that secure paper trail so that everything is on the up and up and minted and known out there on the blockchain to protect whatever's found. Because you don't know when you turn the corner and find something or break through into the next cave wall, which culture that treasure is going to be coming from and who's going to try and swoop in and take it. So that's a really fascinating way to deal with the problem.
I mean, I think that, what people don't really understand about this treasure, especially in the Philippines, is that, think about the progress, so, the Japanese pillaged this treasure from China, and look at China. For 10,000 dynasties or 10,000 years of dynasties, China was out just pillaging the world, killing and taking anything that wasn't nailed down. They weren't putting it in the bank. It would go into a monastery. It would go into an imperial palace somewhere up in the mountains. And, 10,000 years, I mean, it's hard for every person to wrap their head around this amount of time. But for 10,000 years, if you're pillaging, you've amassed a lot of wealth. And the Japanese were not just coming into the Philippines just when the war broke out. They were, there's documentation and records of their engineers coming in 1920 and started looking and looking for, vaults, temporary vault places or places that they could store this treasure, 24 years before the war even began. So they started pillaging and taking stuff from China long before, and their little island is pretty small, so they had to diversify where that they could put it. Philippines was kind of neutral ground at the time, so they figured, hey, we'll just go in here. There's lots of lava tubes and all kinds of tunnels and things that water bore out and whatever. We'll just widen all this stuff, and then we'll leave these places to store these treasures. And it wasn't like, the war is going to roll around, especially in the 20s. There was no war. They were just building vaults to put mass amounts of treasure into, and they would close that up, seal it up. And I really think it was like a dowry for Japan for the next 1,000 years. You could just come back to that site 100 years in the future, 200-300 years in the future, and dig up, 1,000 metric tons of gold and, continue furthering your advancement of your empire. Unfortunately, there was so much gold that all of these vaults that were separated and where it was buried, I mean, it was just massive amounts of gold. And what history tells us is, well, they only took what was in banks and in museums, and the public knowledge side of it. But that's not really the case. All those emperors and all those monasteries, all their riches and items were stolen and taken. And then, they end up in the Philippines, and now the war is over, and the Philippine farmer comes back to his land and he sees these markers and all this other stuff. And then they, as this treasure stories start to evolve, they, every marker that's on somebody's property, they think there's treasure there, and they start digging holes until they either find the treasure or, they get killed, or, they find nothing, and then they just move over and dig a new hole because they got nothing else to do. But throughout time, the bigger treasures get stolen by the government, even for our own sake as Americans. When the American military comes in, it's my personal belief that they wanted nothing to do really with, helping the Filipinos or stopping the war. They wanted to get their hands on the gold. And, the Black Eagle Trust Fund that evolves from that, and, all the other gold that's stolen that they barter with Yamashita as he's going in for war crimes and under trial and stuff. They're just making deals like, okay, tell me where this treasure is, and we'll, let you live, or we'll, even though we're not going to let you live, we'll take care of your family forever. These kind of barter systems, so that everybody wants the gold, everybody wants their piece of the pie, so History Channel is just about kind of getting into that before we all got shut down, and maybe the truth of how all this gold actually got there, what Marcos was doing throughout his power structure reign there. I mean, there's evidence that shows that Marcos moved 1.3 million metric tons of gold throughout his presidency. You know how much gold that is? I mean, and where it ended up, and he put it in bullion accounts and basically got it through the London Gold Bullion Exchange to be certified as clean, good gold, and then set it into these bullion accounts in third or fourth person out from his family's names, and 30, 40-year terms on this gold to keep it away from his asset, so that if he did get taken down or go out of power, that they couldn't confiscate it. And those accounts are all over the place, and I've tracked them all over the world, and we are talking some serious tonnage, 1,000 metric tons, 5,000 metric tons, 100 tons here, 5,000 there, 10,000 tons there. It's mind-boggling that it is all over the place. And when you really start to look deep at it, well, why is it there? Who's benefiting from it? Well, the bank is benefiting from it because they let people borrow up against it. And there's interest payments that come off of that gold being vaulted there. And where did all these interest payments go? Oh, they go back into the Executive 300 account. And everybody, these entities around the world, the 300 per se, all take a cut of that profit margin every year. And that still goes on till today. And it's just crazy, the amount of money that's coming across to these countries and individuals, part of that Executive 300, just from the interest payments of that gold that he stole and put into these accounts. It's mind-boggling. So, and there's a lot of gold still left there, and I know where it is. We have the technology, we have access to satellites, we have every piece of ground equipment you could possibly throw at this thing to authenticate that there's a tunnel here, there's this here, there's a massive pile of precious metals here. And not every piece of equipment can tell you can't run a radar over a site. It may tell you that there's a tunnel there, or void space, or this. And even though there was a pile of gold in the middle, the radar is not going to tell you that's a pile of gold. It can only say that there's an anomaly here that is in this tunnel. And we see the hyperbola and the data that says there's something there, but it can't tell you that it's a precious metal. So you have to use multiple pieces of equipment to back each other. One backs up the other to say that this anomaly is here. There is certainly something here that doesn't belong. And what is it? Satellite can, kind of hone in on it and tell you that it's a precious metal. And then it's about building a plan to actually go after it and recover.
Right. Then you have to actually execute getting access in there and going in there and moving forward, to follow the evidence and everything, which we see that on the season finale of the Blind Frog Ranch show, that they get down in there and they notice that the cave system is not only a lot larger and more vast than they thought, but it's definitely man-made. It looks like cleanly done. You can't even hardly see a lot of the pick marks or chisel marks on the wall. It's very interesting. But they do find some carvings or scratch markings on the wall. My initial thought that it was like an ore count for some kind of a mining operation that went on there and was hauling ore out of there. What do you think, Stephanie? What are your thoughts on the markings on the wall, or what could be going on there?
I think
All
that
right.
the scratch marks on the wall
that was
also
weird.
were probably an ore count.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. That was interesting too, because I'm
I'm
like,
sorry.
that's not days of the week, but yeah, but it's like I'm not experienced enough with the mines to know exactly what that is. But I'm just curious to, I'm hoping that you can find the dry entrance or the entrance where it's been damaged. Why did they close the cave off? What's the reason? Because obviously that cave system's so large. I mean, could people have been living in there?
Yeah, Stephanie, you've
It's
actually
just
grown
so
up.
huge.
You've had a lot of different kind of mysterious experiences throughout your life. Do you think they might? There's also legends and myths and folklore about like curses on the land and the region, and maybe even strange anomalies occurring. Do you think that the team might encounter anything strange there as well?
Yes, because you have that energy zone that's very close to it. It's not that far from it where the possible meteorite, well, Duane says there's a meteorite there. You got the blue dirt there too. So who's protecting the land, and why did that cave system have to be closed off? And what are those marks? That I feel like when the season finale ended, I'm like, I have more questions, and I would love to see them go back in or have some drone or some kind of robot device to go in there and explore, if possible. But obviously it's dry. I also wonder, was there footprints on the ground from previous people? Is there any like leftover materials from the people who were inside that cave system? I know they didn't get very far to explore, but wow, there's just so much more questions than answers right now.
Yeah,
you know?
John, you think it was also an ore count as well, those carvings on the wall, or what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of mine sites, you would see these counts, but it's strange because they didn't come down the tube, obviously. So whatever the entrance was, and normally that count marker system would be near a portal to get out, so they're bringing the ore out. Okay. And the guy's standing there and he makes another scratch on the wall. Okay. That's the fifth ore cart out the door. And usually that's near the exit point or, the point that they're going to go process the ore. There's 100 reasons why that place, is sealed up. A landslide, a mountain could have came down around it. The gases could have built up to the point where they were getting sick, and they decided we can't work in here any longer. Let's shut it down. Let's close it up and make sure it's safe that no one else goes in here and dies. It's weird to look at the smoothness of the wall. It's not like our normal mine site where you would have the rock would be craggly. Or if you're on a fault line per se, you have the hanging wall and the footwall. You come up against two different shears of rock, and the fault gouge or material that's in the fault that may be mineable minerals would basically be scraped off of the flat section of rock. And so you're kind of used to seeing flatter sections of rock where gouged material came out of, and it left the country rocks staying still that has no mineral value. That place was weird in a lot of aspects that it looked like it could have been flooded in the past, and maybe water moving through it really smoothed out all the nooks and crannies that would have been more rough when you were mining it, because it's really amazing how smooth all the cracks and turns were. And the only way we could get that way would be lots of water running through the location and kind of smoothing it down over the course of time. Looking on the floor, you see a very fine dust, which is there's no real rocks laying around. It wasn't like, in a mine site, you would have bigger or all size rocks on the floor from, the crunchiness of whatever you chiseled off. You wouldn't get it all out, and it would just be kind of crunchy in there, little stones and pebbles all over. But that really wasn't the case. It was like dust or like silt that's dropped out of water as it's passing through a location for a long period of time. Depending on the time of the year, the water looks like it hasn't been in there in quite some time. So maybe the way the water got in there for 50 years and was smoothing out the walls has now been closed off, and the water can't get in there, and it's slowly dried out over time. Certainly the desert, even at 85 some odd feet, the ground would be warm enough to dry that place out, there was some sort of airflow coming from somewhere and or where the water escaped from. That might still be open. So
Very interesting.
right now, I don't think it's what we call a living cave or a breathing cave because there's gases in there, and the gases would have escaped through any vent holes that were in there. Air would have been forced down and pushing the gases out over the course of time. But with their detectors going off like that makes me think that if there was an exit for the air to go through, it's closed up. So it's going to take a lot more exploration further on to see if there's a location where it caved in or was purposely backfilled. If it's purposely backfilled, at least you could unstack it. If it collapsed, you're going to have to dig another tunnel around that because it's not prudent to go through a collapse zone because more than likely it's going to keep collapsing on top of you. So that's an assessment they're really going to have to make as they get further into the cave system and see what they're confronted with. It's really an unknown right now.
Yeah. James, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, John hit one of the points that I wanted to make too, was there's a lot of reservoirs that have now been put in place all around that area for the last 40, 50 years and would have stopped the natural flow of the underground water, if it was put in after the sinkhole, but before the cave system. So that may be diverted elsewhere. And that's, I think a lot of people saw that it was very, very smooth. Didn't look like a mining operation had taken place in a very long time, if that indeed is what it was used for. I mean, you can always go into maybe this was an underground site to, do something other than mining too. There's, I guess, always that possibility. The Uintah Mountains are specifically set in a certain way and direction. They're high enough elevated to have survived many catastrophic events, especially if there were large deluges. I would definitely head to northeastern Utah if it were happening again. But I think there's a lot of questions that were created, and I'm hoping that they'll get to those answers before season 3, maybe, or right in season 3. And in regards to the actual entrance, remember that the Native Americans were pretty tired about the Mormons in the area going in and reopening these mines and all that. So they did a lot of the collapsing themselves, or, they detonated it with dynamite and brought them down purposely to keep people out, because they don't see it as a treasure site. They see it, as something far more than that is important to their culture, to their civilization. And we have to remember and always respect those beliefs whenever we're attempting to do any type of, taking any type of material, whether it be an ore, cached bullion, or artifacts. And you also have to look and see that maybe these are from cultures and civilizations that even predated the Native Americans. So there's a lot of questions that hopefully, going forward, some of those answers will be found.
So let's we're coming up here on a full hour-long show now. So let's just make our best guesses on who we think maybe made the caves and what they're going to find down there. Because if I was going to make my guess, I'll go first. I think that there's levels and layers of culture that have come through, and some of those cultures are lost. But I think they used the natural aquifer systems and cave systems that naturally are occurring, that were carved out by the underground water systems, and they went into those entrances through dry access, and then they tried to mine out what they could get. They also did probably ritualistic ceremonies at different times, or treated them as spiritual locations to hide their relics, and then other cultures came in and used them as depositories for hiding different treasure caches and artifacts. So that would be my best guess. And along with that is a lot of strangeness and myths and folklore that's wrapped up in that as well. So, Stephanie, what do you think they might find, and who do you think maybe made the caves?
Well, I think I'm like thinking, I'm like, but it could be the Fremont people. They could have created that and lived in there and used the information from the Native American tribes, Aztecs, who created the cliff dwellings. Instead of doing cliff dwellings, they created cave systems. And then the trappers and fur traders and all them found it, and the Native Americans found it, and so everyone was using it. And in this Chronicle of Ashley Valley events, there's a lot of history that hasn't been really spoken on the show yet. So we don't have enough time to talk about it, but I'll pass the mic off to James. Who do you think created a cave system?
Yeah, I have no idea who created. I think it's been reopened, reoccupied. Again, it's a very interesting underground cavity and void system. Unusual for mining operation from looking around, more so than what I'm used to seeing. So again, it just seems like a lot of time has passed.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Definitely. John, what's your best guess? What do you think they might find down there, and who maybe made the caves up in the basin?
I mean, I hope they find, some evidence of what happened. Just looking at the tunnel itself and the smoothness of it, that tunnel, to get that smooth, if water was coursing through there, would take thousands of years to do. So it's very possible that tunnel is thousands of years old. And what was it used for back then? Accordingly, even in the D-Ray Metallica, they would, mine the gold out of these locations, and then they'd turn it into crude bars and doré, and then they would haul it back to Mexico to the ships, but they, wouldn't haul it all at the same time. So they'd build it up and then they'd store it in locations like this. So it may have been a treasure storage location until, they had their 300 donkeys ready to make the trek to Mexico, and they just keep mining it and storing the bars in here until such time it was time to move it to the ship or get it to a different location. Or the opposite way around, as the Aztecs were escaping the Spanish Inquisition and started pushing all of their artifacts and everything that was gold and precious and that they wanted to preserve, they knew about the cave system and would use that as storage as they moved further and further away from the Spanish coming. So it could have been used for multiple different types of storage over the years, and may have ended up, as originally started out as a mine site. And, 1,000 years later, now it's used as a storage facility, and the natives would have known of the location as opposed to the white man. And further, as we go on into this day and age, now all we can do is speculate, what's going on there. But if was treasure there, if there was Spaniards there, if there was, anything of the sort there, those guys are going to find that evidence in there. It's in there somewhere. So I'm really looking forward to them getting deeper into the cave system and hopefully, making some major discoveries to kind of prove out what history was telling us. Maybe it is one of the storehouses of the seven cities of Cibola, and, very well possibly could be. So it's
Definitely.
Pretty cool.
It's very intriguing, and we're going to continue to find out more, but for now we're going to have to wait on the edge of our seat. But in the off season, when the TV show isn't going on, there still is a lot going on up at the basin and up around Blind Frog Ranch. I know that Stephanie lives up there. James and I have got some stuff planned to go up there, and hopefully we can maybe get John to come along on a couple of trips to help us out too, if we can trick him into coming out there and checking it out. So we appreciate everybody for joining us on the show today, and everybody's input and insight on what's going on in the mystery of Blind Frog Ranch. I think it spans out beyond that, and everybody's great work. John, what you're doing to try and help turn this entire treasure hunting and historical artifact hunting quest into something that betters the world, and that you're doing that. I think we all have a lot to learn from. And also everybody in the comment section that joined us and watched in the live, we appreciate you all so much. And make sure and head on over to the Blind Frog Ranch Outpost to get 15% off your BFR scuba sweat shirts and use the coupon code Scuba Sweat at blindfrogranchoutpost.com. I just wanted to throw that out there, our official sponsor. You guys, really quick, make sure and tell everybody where they can find you. James, you're on Instagram and have a website and everything. I'll pop that up on the screen. So do you have anything upcoming they can look forward to?
I do. My new book should be releasing by the end of the month. It's called The Giant and the Golden Underworld. So if that doesn't give it away after this discussion, and where it takes place, and even though it's fictional, it's not. You have to go through there. You'll get a lot of useful information in regards to the two ranches there in the basin, and a lot of the other unexplainable events and strangeness that takes place.
That sounds awesome. James, are you doing that as a fictional story, or are you running in this one as a always fictional? I love to, have a good story and teach some lessons on the way through it. But it also allows me to put a lot of hypotheses together and get out some of the information that I might not be able to get out any other way, maybe because of things like an NDA or, so just, hint, hint. Right. So that's really fun. You get to embed all the truth inside of a fictional scaffolding. Stephanie, how about you? Where can anybody find you, or do you have anything going on?
I'm on Instagram. And I take photos around Vernal all the time. I'm on Facebook. And more information will be coming on, that sort of stuff. But I recommend, if you're coming through Vernal, Utah, stop at the Heritage Museum, check out the Fremont people display we have. Also, Blind Frog Outpost is here, which is awesome to check out on Saturdays. I don't know the hours on Thursday and Fridays, but they're open on Saturdays. But there's lots to see in Vernal. There's dinosaur bones. There's, just lots of things to see here. So I recommend people coming here for a vacation. So
definitely. Yeah. Thank you,
okay.
Stephanie. And John, how about you? What do you have going on, and where can people find your work?
We're going to do Treasure Quest. The Treasure Quest NFT is going to mint in a couple weeks, and we're still building our community up as we get closer into the space. So we want people to join. We want to build our community so that we help protect these treasures, now from this point forward and into the future. Got some really great treasure hunters that are world class, and they love the idea. They love the space. They're coming to me like, please, get my treasure onto your program, because we need to protect these treasures. We need to share it with the world. And this is the only way that we physically see it going to be able to happen. So, with that, please check out our website. It's, I think it's listed there, treasure-quest.io, and our Discord at discord.gg/quest. And all the other information, the white paper and our mission statement, is all in the website.
Perfect. Thanks so much, you guys, for joining us on the show today. It was a great one. And stay tuned, because we're going to keep posting on this channel with more interviews, more findings, and maybe even do a full season recap with the cast and crew. But hopefully we'll get that pulled together. So stay tuned, everybody, and we will see you guys in the next one.
Thank you, guys.